welcome to another edition of VU Sports Wired, hosted by no more than one person that can now drink alcohol at Vanderbilt baseball games. I am Cutler Klein alongside Simon Gibbs, Ryan Sheehy. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. We have a fantastic show for you this afternoon, bringing you all sorts of news and notes from around Vanderbilt athletics. And we start now with the absolute unmitigated disaster that was Vanderbilt Kentucky in basketball last night at Memorial Gym. An absolute thrashing by the Wildcats, 30-plus point defeat at home in front of a raucous Rupp Arena crowd at Memorial Gym, which is unfortunate for Vanderbilt. Just a lot of nothing going for Vanderbilt in this game. They had 15 points in total in the first half. They had more turnovers than they did field goals made in the entire game. That's a stat you never want to see. And now, at this point in the season, you know, they don't have to play Kentucky anymore. They have one more game against Tennessee. They have yet to get an SEC win. And even with getting those two teams out of the way, the road doesn't get any easier given their remaining opponents. I mean, how does Vanderbilt recover from that type of disaster? Because it would be one thing if they just lost to Kentucky, or even if they had played them close for more than the first 5 minutes. But to lose like that, to do it like that, how do you recover from here?
I think they have to start playing the long game, and I think recovery has to be more than just what they can do at the rest of this season. Ken Pom recently revealed that Vanderbilt is not favored to win in any of their games for the remainder of the season, and their greatest chance, according to Ken Pom, is home versus Alabama, where they have a 41% chance of winning. I personally can see this ending with a winless season in the SEC. I think you have to look at little things that they can improve that not only Coach Drew can point to and say that his coaching has been improving the team, but also help when the recruits come in next year to set a precedent and say, like, hey, like, rather than what happened last night where they shot 50% from the free throw line, had 20 turnovers and only 17 field goals the entire game, they can say, hey, like, this is a team where you come in, you shoot 85% from the free throw line. This is a team where you come in and you use the offensive schemes, unlike last night where at times it seemed like they were just taking isolated dribble shots that made no sense. And if you can implement these little things, I don't think you really need to look at wins and losses. I think you just have to look at how their weaknesses thus far that have made them lose many games, and some of them by not so decisive a margin. I mean, we've seen them lose within just a few points in many of these games. As long as they can improve those, I guess that's how you recover from the disaster that happened last night. But again, I think the long-term result is ultimately going to have to be next year, as we can all assume by now.
Yeah, and I mean, I look at the game last night and I look at the rest of their SEC play aside from, maybe you can point out the Tennessee game or one other. There's not really much to be optimistic about here. Like, I guess Simon has the solution of, going for the long game, trying to build for next year and the year after. But as far as this season's concerned, a winless SEC schedule is completely possible. I look at the game and I look at the way they've been playing in games besides the Kentucky game as well, and I don't see a whole lot of problems on the defensive side of the ball. They seem to be playing fairly well. The problem is that they're not making free throws. They seem to have a pretty generic offensive scheme that's not generating a whole lot of open shots. And then from there, they're just not knocking down threes at the rate that we thought this team was going to be coming into the season, with a couple of aces from the arc. So really the only adjustments you're going to make in season here is maybe a drastic change to the offensive scheme as a whole, and working throughout, the coming months in the offseason on improving the team's free throw shooting as a whole.
That actually reminds me of something that I wanted to mention, is that this team needs to stop relying on the three-pointer that they can't hit consistently.
Yeah.
I mean, it's abundantly clear that they're not the three-point shooting team that we once thought, as you alluded to. They keep letting it fly from 3 feet, 4 feet behind the arc, expecting it to just solve every problem. And we see when they play well, it happens to be the games where, honestly, it could be luck, it could be skill, it probably is a mixture of the two, but so long as they're relying on this, they're going to have some games like Tennessee or the first half of the Kentucky game, the first Kentucky game, the one at Rupp Arena, the first half. Those are two instances where the shots were falling and the team looked good. I don't think you could keep relying on it after what happened last night. And also, I do think the defense is an issue. I mean, I think last night in particular, the big men weren't doing such a great job in the beginning of the game playing defense on the low blocks. And then I think what that leads to is once they do put pressure on the low blocks, we saw plenty of times Kentucky ran the same play, kicking it out to the wing for a wide open three, and it was just a disaster from there on out.
Well, I think if you look at the Tennessee game, I think one of the reasons they were so successful in shooting is because their big men gave them a lot of trouble. They were able to penetrate in there and kick it out for threes for better open looks than they're getting right now. And I think this team really lives and dies by their big men right now, because on defense they were getting outmatched against Kentucky on both offense and defense and the defensive side of the ball. So that's what I think is the big difference. And I think going forward for the rest of the season, I mean, there's obviously no hope of postseason. That's just so far gone at this point. There's just not a lot to play for. But what you have to play for is to give the fans and to give people a reason to think that this team can keep improving in 2020. Because right now, there's not a lot of reasons to think that. And I think if you can, even if you don't win any other games, if you just show signs that things can get better, that things are getting better, show some glimmers of hope that these inexperienced players, when they are experienced, will indeed play well and play up to their potential.
I also want to see Cleveland Brown get more minutes.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, as of late, every 8 or so minutes he plays a game, he's looked great, and I think he's one of those big men that could really help. I wouldn't say stretch the floor in the conventional meaning. It's not like he's shooting threes, but his presence down low makes the defense stretch out and thus making us more effective from the perimeter. And I think it still baffles me that he doesn't play as much as he should. But
yeah,
absolutely. I mean, like I said earlier, I don't. You called the game a disaster, and that's exactly what it was. I mean, you could call the whole season a disaster if you really look at it.
Yeah.
This is a team that came in with some people saying that they were snubbed from preseason top 25 rankings. There was definitely an expectation of at least a March Madness tourney appearance, and all thoughts of anything close to a postseason appearance are off the table at this point. So trying to fix things moving forward, basically you just have to move into, damage control mode. I don't want to say it sounds very negative, but you have to move into something where you're like trying to say, okay, well, we're not going to actually be able to accomplish much this season, but what we can accomplish is maybe not postseason this year, but building the team up for next year and trying to, set in, like you mentioned, the atmosphere, just set an atmosphere of better free throw percentage, better defense in some cases, better three-point shooting, new looks, new schemes that are going to change the way that this team plays next year, because as it stands right now, they're probably only going to have, I believe it's Joe Toy's the only senior on the roster right now.
Yes, he's the only
You're going to
senior.
bring back, for the most part, the same roster last year as next year as you brought this year, except with a few, additions. We have a couple of recruits coming in, but the main focus should be on using this as the remainder of this season as a building time.
I agree.
In order to hopefully come into next season with a stronger team than you would have if you just kept doing what you're doing this year.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what has happened so far this year can be chalked up to inexperience across the board, whether that's on the players or on Bryce Drew's part. And at some point that stops being an excuse, perhaps towards the end of this year when they have nearly played a full SEC schedule. So it's all about kind of just giving fans hope that when these inexperienced players are experienced, that perhaps they'll play well. And moving on to our second topic here, maybe give them hope that this inexperienced coach in Bryce Drew can gain experience and be the good coach that Vanderbilt needs, because Bryce Drew has a losing record at Vanderbilt right now through his 3 seasons. Each season seemingly has gotten worse than the last. He made the NCAA tournament with the remnants of Kevin Stallings' recruits. Last season, a bit of a tough one, but a lot of hope coming into this year. And now an unmitigated disaster so far and staring down the barrel of 0-18 in the SEC. He's still in contention for a lot of 2020 recruits. He's got a pretty solid 4-star recruiting class coming in for next year that's going to provide a lot of help for this team. But is it time to start assessing Bryce Drew's job security and assessing the situation for him?
I think given what you said about the recruits, it's almost impossible to do that right now, and I think the school is in a tough position. I think Malcolm Turner has his work cut out for him, because it's really not only what do you do, but how do you justify your decision, because there are a lot of pros and cons to each, but so I personally think given the recruiting situation, they can't fire him right now. I'm going to play devil's advocate because I do like Coach Drew. I think he's great at recruiting, and I think he's shown glimpses of being a great coach. But I'm just going to play devil's advocate here for a second and say Coach Drew has had an extremely difficult time fixing the little lingering issues that end up killing them. I mean, many of them put together. You see them day in and day out in each game. They watch it in film, but they can't seem to fix it, whether it be turnovers, whether it be post defense, whether it be perimeter defense, moving on offense. And free throws are my biggest concern because we see in the first Kentucky game, they let that one slip by 7 or 8 points. And a lot of that could be attributed to missed free throws. And I asked Bryce Drew after the game what they do moving forward, and he assured the media that they have been doing all they can to practice free throws, to perfect their free throws and make sure that something like that doesn't happen again, to let a great win slip away from them. But I asked the same question yesterday and said, you face Kentucky again, and you've struggled again from the free throw line. Vanderbilt went 9 for 18 from the free throw line last night. He gave the exact same answer, and it's kind of unacceptable. I don't say it's his fault. I mean, it's hard to fix a player's free throw stroke, but the same issue is in the exact same game, or, well, I wouldn't say the same game considering how close the first one was compared to this one, but against the same opponent, they're making similar mistakes that, quite frankly, if they're not fixed, this team is never going to compete.
I mean, I think at this point, we're talking about assessing his job status, and I think that's certainly what needs to start happening in terms of, you have to look at, well, is he really going to be the coach we want moving forward? I think the coach in the modern, NCAA basketball scenario has 2 roles. You have to recruit good talent, and then you have to coach that talent to wins. Bryce Drew has already proven through the 2 recruitment classes he's pulled in, he's definitely capable of recruiting great players. I mean, we had the 2 highest recruits in program history this season. You have 2 4-stars coming in next year, Scottie Pippen Jr. You've got all these, pieces that he's bringing in, but the coach also has to be able to then put those pieces together into a beautiful puzzle.
Right.
And I haven't seen him do that. I mean, he took the Kevin Stallings team, and you could say that there was maybe a swing of momentum that season, and they turned it around, made the tournament with a less than stellar record.
Maybe should have won that tournament game too if it weren't for the foul.
Yeah.
Get that out. Yeah, absolutely. But the other 2 seasons, there's no, well, this is coming from this season, Kevin Stallings, or this is his recruiting class, or anything about that. He's had solid talent, I think, both seasons, and he's going to have a losing record both seasons.
Yeah. So
I don't know if you say, okay, well, he needs to be fired. I think what you have to do is, as much as we just talked about what you do the rest of the season, with the game being a disaster, you have to look at what he's going to do the rest of the season. If he gives the program and the fans hope, like Cutler mentioned, that things are going to turn around at some point under his tenure, then yeah, I'd probably keep him on another year, let him keep recruiting, let him keep building with these players that he's brought into the building, that he's been with through the entire process. But if there's no signs of hope that things are getting better by the end of the season, you have to think it's a serious possibility he's let go.
I mean, you look at the talent that Vanderbilt has brought in, and that is interested in Vanderbilt, especially in 2020, players like Walker Kessler, Keon Johnson. Those are guys that Vanderbilt never would have had a shot at before under Kevin Stallings. Never would have had a chance. And so when you're working within that framework, as long as those elite guys are still interested, I think you still have to keep them on board. Next season is going to be a very interesting time. Will the team turn it around? That remains to be seen. And I think anything better than this is a positive, because there's not much worse than what has happened this season. But you look at that, and if those guys, those 2020 guys, commit, if those guys are still interested and still believe in Coach Drew, and I think if there's anybody that can talk his way into signing guys even after this season, it's Bryce Drew. Just given how incredibly nice he is and how incredibly charismatic he is in person-to-person interactions. I think as long as those guys are interested, then I think he stays. But once those players start going elsewhere, and that could happen as early as December of 2019, that's when you really start to see the foundation start to crumble.
I mean, we debated a little bit on radio on what this season would have looked like record-wise if Garland was in the lineup. I'm going to put that speculation aside. What I will say is that if Garland was in this lineup, whatever their record might be would allow the school to make a more definitive decision on this. Because I think if the team looked as bad as they did right now with Darius Garland in the lineup, you would have to say that this could be Coach Drew's end. I think the team wouldn't look that way if Garland was in the lineup, but point in case is that you have to look at this in perspective, as we've all touched on a little bit. Some injuries here and there, a few tough breaks with the, I would say, foul calls, but we'll see if, I mean, Coach Calipari even mentioned that in the press conference yesterday, that Vanderbilt has just been getting pummeled by referees recently. But I think given the situation, unique situation with the Garland injury and a few losses decided almost by the refs, I think it's nearly impossible for them to make a decision on this Bryce Drew case.
And I want to say that, like, by no means am I suggesting that he must be fired at the end of this season. What I am saying is that ultimately, you know, Cutler pointed out that, you know, recruits and, you know, what the possibility to bring in blue chip talent is very essential to, you know, what you're going to look for in a future head coach. And if you don't think you can find anyone that's going to do that better than Bryce Drew, then obviously that's a huge benefit to him in terms of keeping his job. But ultimately, the coach is called the coach. I mean, there's plenty of other people that can recruit in other means and ways. I mean, we just brought in the G League commissioner to be our athletics director. There's plenty of, I think, opportunity to still bring in good talent, but when you can't win with that good talent, then you have to start questioning the coaching ability beyond that. So, I mean, I think that's part of what my other concern is that I feel like this season we saw that with, you know, he brought in a recruiting class that had 2 5-stars and a 4-star, and yes, Darius Garland was injured early on, and he's probably going to go top 10 in the NBA draft. But beyond that, you still have a 5-star who was top 15, top 20 in the country last season, and you have the South Carolina Gatorade Player of the Year, I believe, is the popular factoid about Aaron Neesmith.
Better than Zion Williamson.
Better than Zion Williamson. So there's that. But, I mean, you have to eventually look at it and say, you have someone, I used the example of a puzzle earlier, no matter how many pieces he acquires, is he ever going to put the puzzle together? And if you don't think he can, then maybe it's time to settle for someone who's going to bring in less pieces but be able to do more with them.
And Kevin Stallings did that for a number of years, lesser talent, but still made plenty of NCAA tournaments, made a Sweet 16 even in 2007, so it remained to be seen what happens with that.
One thing I will add before we move on from Bryce Drew is that if this downward spiral continues, but the recruits keep coming in, then Bryce Drew should leave his job and become a general manager, because it's really impressive how he does it.
Oh yeah, like I said, if there's anyone that could be able to pull that off in the face of all of these results and still be able to bring kids in, it would definitely be him, because I mean, if he weren't doing this, he would be the best salesman for anything he did on the entire planet. And that's a credit to him, because he is just a genuine, nice, caring person, and I think basically the anti-Stallings in a certain way, for those who remember his tenure here. Moving on, finally, tomorrow, Thursday, January 31st, is David Williams' last day after 17 years as Vanderbilt's athletic director. It's been an interesting tenure, to say the least. So much growth has happened over this time. Vanderbilt's basketball team has been to plenty of NCAA tournaments. Vanderbilt football team making lots of bowl games, 6 of them to be exact, starting under Bobby Johnson and moving through James Franklin and Derek Mason. SEC championships, 4 national championships in David Williams' tenure. However, the way his tenure ended, it left a lot of people wanting more. It left a lot of people desiring kind of the next step for this program. But you guys, to wrap up the show here, I mean, David has done so much for this program and has done so much for Vanderbilt athletics as a whole. What do you think his legacy is going to be? How do you think he should be remembered as Vanderbilt's athletic director in his lengthy tenure?
Look, Cutler, you pointed on the athletic success. I mean, 4 national championships in his tenure, and prior to his arrival, they hadn't made a bowl game in football since 1982, and now they've made 6 since he's been here. I really think, though, that his legacy can and should be so much more than athletics. Mm-hmm. He was the first African-American athletic director in the Southeastern Conference, and you see his impact at Vanderbilt the way he involves himself outside of athletics, the way he's helped with this Center for Sports and Society, the way he's still taught, to my knowledge, at Owen Law School and will continue to teach there. I also saw something that he wanted to create an initiative that is a sports law sort of track, I believe, in the graduate school. Aside from the point, though, he does so much outside of the classroom that I think, as cheesy as this may sound, he does reflect the whole Vanderbilt man image of, you see Coach Mason asking of his football players that they are the typical Vanderbilt man, that they are both in the classroom and they are out on the football field. He is both involved in sports, involved in academics, and he's even involved in other extracurriculars around campus. I think his legacy has so much more to do with the success, although you could look at the success alone and say he's retiring on a good note. He's retiring in his final season. I mean, his football team made a bowl game. And that was a huge bowl game to make because there was some speculation over what, same thing we're having with Bryce Drew just now, what they should do with Coach Mason. And there was a point in time where the team looked like a total unmitigated disaster. They really quickly turned things around. They made a bowl game. And that's all a reflection of David Williams because he brought in Coach Mason in the first place.
Absolutely. And I think David Williams' ultimate legacy is going to be one in that he did not sacrifice that Vanderbilt man image that you just, promptly pointed out for, athletic success, but he still managed to improve the program while he was here. It was an amazing combination of building up the athletics department, the 4 national titles, the bowl games when we had none in decades, and now you look at the program and it's completely different. Vanderbilt, while it may not be at the top of every sport, is relevant in most, I would say.
Yeah.
And the ultimate emphasis that he always put on the student athletes was, okay, you're an athlete, you're also a student. You have to, show out in the classroom and on the field. He's not going to sacrifice the education component of those, student athletes' college careers just for, possible extra results on the field or the court or whatever it happens to be. And I think that dedication to development of these individuals as a whole is what really set David Williams' approach apart from those, you might see at other schools, not to name names, but his emphasis on helping those young people really develop themselves, not just, using them to win games, was, I think, ultimately what people are going to take away from his tenure and what people are going to look back most fondly on.
I agree. Yeah, and one of the things that you hear all the time from student athletes and from David himself about the way he's approached his job is that he has had a lot of close personal relationships with the players, the student athletes that come into Vanderbilt. He talks all the time about how he hears from alums all the time. One morning he gets a text that Jordan Matthews and his wife have had a baby, and then later that night he went to a wedding of another Vanderbilt football alum. He keeps in touch with these people, and they are drawn to him, and he makes sure to have that close personal relationship that doesn't happen elsewhere. Joe Toye told me the other day that he has friends at other top universities, and they don't have any type of relationship with their athletic director. But Joe Toye, when he was being recruited, David Williams talked to him, talked to his family, sold them on this family atmosphere at Vanderbilt, and it really is that way because he treats all of these people as individuals, not as just as athletes that are going to make the school money. He treats them as human beings. He treats them as student athletes. I think that's an incredibly special aspect of it. The other thing that I'll say is that over his tenure here, Vanderbilt has become infinitely more respectable in a lot of different sports. He's made a lot of home run hires with coaches. You look at people like Darren Ambrose for the soccer program, Stephanie White, Bryce Drew. I know we just talked about Bryce Drew, but at the time it seemed like a pretty great hire. Derek Mason. James Franklin was also one of his hires. Yeah. And you look at what he did for the program in just a few years. So Vanderbilt has become infinitely more respectable in a lot of things. And while they might not be perennial championship contenders in every sport, they're pretty freaking good.
Yeah, in baseball they are, though.
Oh, in baseball they are too, and David Williams oversaw baseball in 2002, and that was right before Tim Corbin came to Vanderbilt. So you could say a lot of the success that has happened here just because David Williams has been here.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, so, Mr. Williams, thank you so much for everything you've done for Vanderbilt athletics. Good luck in retirement. And, just thank you so much. It's been an honor to cover Vanderbilt athletics in your time here. That'll just about do it for this week's episode of VU Sports Wired. Thank you so much to everyone for tuning in. For Ryan Sheehy, Simon Gibbs, I'm Cutler Klein saying so long, and we'll see you next time.